Welcome everyone to the University Interdisciplinary Colloquium for the 19th of March. We're really grateful to all of you for taking time out of your day to spend with us, and we're very excited about today's presentation. I'd like to begin with the land acknowledgement for Michigan State University. Michigan State University occupies the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary lands of the Anishinaabe, Three Fires Confederacy of Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi peoples. In particular, the university resides on land ceded in the 1819 Treaty of Saginaw. We recognize Michigan's 12 federally recognized Native nations, historic Indigenous communities in Michigan, Indigenous individuals and communities who live here now, and those who were forcibly removed from their homelands. In offering this land acknowledgement, we affirm Indigenous sovereignty, history, and experiences. If you're interested in learning more about this, I'll put a couple of links in the chat after I'm done that takes you to pages where there's more information about the land acknowledgement. Again, welcome to the University Interdisciplinary Colloquium, which is a forum organized by the Center for Interdisciplinarity at Michigan State and sponsored by the College of Arts and Letters, that highlights the innovative and important interdisciplinary work involving arts and humanities at Michigan State. Interdisciplinarity is often associated with the sciences, whether biophysical sciences or health sciences, especially at major research universities. And the innovative, powerful, fascinating interdisciplinary work of artists and humanists is often marginalized and not appreciated. And our interest with the UIC is to foreground that work, to amplify the signal of artistic and humanistic interdisciplinarity, and also to communicate to the university community just how valuable contributions from artists and humanists to interdisciplinary collaborations can be. Right, so we're really interested with this series to acknowledge and amplify interdisciplinary contributions that feature aesthetic and humanistic elements. We meet every other week in the fall and spring semesters. This year and next year, our slate will be entirely on Zoom, so the series will be fully virtual. The next University Interdisciplinary Colloquium will be in 2 weeks on the 2nd of April, 12 to 1. On Zoom. This link will work for that session as well. Our presenter will be Nicole T. Buchanan, who is professor of psychology at Michigan State University. And Nicole will give a presentation entitled Epistemic Exclusion and Research Biases, How Scholarly Elitism Limits Scholarly Innovation and Relevance. So that's in 2 weeks. Today, we're thrilled to have with us young Joon Kwak. Young Joon received their MFA from the University of Southern California in 2014, an MA in Humanities from the University of Chicago in 2010, and a BFA from the School of Art Institute of Chicago in 2007. A multidisciplinary artist, they primarily work in sculpture, performance, video, and community-based collaborations to reimagine bodies and the power structures that govern our everyday lives as mutable and permeable sites of collective survival, political resistance, and agency. Kwak is the lead performer in the electronic dance noise band Zena Zerner and the founder of Mutant Salon, a roving platform for collaborative installations and performances with their queer, trans, POC, mutant community. Kwak has presented their artwork internationally at many galleries and institutions, among them the Hammer Museum, the Broad Institute of Contemporary Art, Los Angeles, and Museum of Modern and Contemporary Art in Seoul, Korea, and the Art Museum of the National University of Colombia in Bogota. They have also received a number of awards, including the Korea Arts Foundation of America's Award for the Visual Arts in 2020, and the Rima Hort Mann Foundation's Emerging Artist Grant in 2018. Kwak is the 2020-2021 Artist in Residence in Critical Race Studies at Michigan State University. The culminating art exhibition of their residency, Spartan Skin, opens at the MSU Union Gallery on April 9. Today, they are with us to deliver a talk entitled Spartan Skin, Impressions from the symbol of campus pride. Young Joon.
Hi, thanks. Thanks, Michael, for the intro. Let me just share my screen. Yeah, again, can y'all see? Okay.
That looks good.
Preview window, just the image, right? Yeah. For some reason, my
That's right. That's right. Just the image.
Okay. Yeah. I'm like, I've got my preview open with my slides and my notes on the other thing. I don't know, Keynote's not working, so. But anyways, thanks again, Michael and Stephanie Vasco for inviting me to present here. And I'd also like to thank Karin Zitzwitz and Jacqueline Sullivan Gould in the Department of Art History and Design. And the MSU Federal Credit Union for sponsoring my residency here. So yeah, I work in sculpture, performance, sound, video, collaboration, and cross-disciplinary community-based projects. I'm interested in objects and materials. I take a kind of a fluid approach to playing with and rethinking the form, functionality, and materiality of objects as a means of countering and resisting the dehumanizing and harmful ways in which historically marginalized bodies have been objectified. I know it seems counterintuitive, but I mean, so are of the little identity categories that we get boxed into. So I think it's important to note that I work in multiple contexts, institutional and not. And, on a base level, it's like my community is very important to me. I see these aspects of my practice as all being intertwined in terms of my goal of producing alternative ways of viewing and interpreting bodies and the physical and social spaces that govern our everyday lives. And I just to preface things a little bit further, so I see our bodies as sites of radical contradiction, how a body presents itself, how it is read, belying its true lived yet unperceived nature. And I'm interested in rethinking ideas of body plasticity and that and kind of thinking about new creative possibilities for imagining new forms of survival and empathy and understanding of different bodies. For this talk, I'll start by speaking about just a few older works for context, and then I'll move on to the project that I'm working on with the Spartan statue, which will debut at the MSU Union Gallery in April 9th. And let's see. Okay, so starting with this piece, Excreted Venus. It's a large-scale photo that's a little over 7 feet tall, but I want to say like 4 feet wide. And it's actually a composite of several different photos. And so the strange proportions of this body is because the photo is actually an aggregate of several different photos taken from different angles of that have been patched together. And so my Venus, normally a vivacious symbol of the feminine divine, here it's been excreted, spilling onto against a grid. And with this, I was thinking of how exemplary bodies, and I think that it relates to my current work too. I think a lot about how exemplary bodies are mechanisms for the workings of power through discourse, and that they invoke an identification in the viewer and a sign of objectification for the subjugation of us all. And so, and I created this piece and, with like a kind of question of like, oh, what if the exemplary femme body of beauty, of divinity, prosperity, and, was one of fluidity, formlessness, and fragmentation, and, imagining this new figure as an icon for some sort of newly radical form of consumption and identification, then what would happen to these, identifications of beauty, gender, race, etc. Moving on, I'm going to share with you some work that from an exhibition I made in 2017 that was called Hermi or Hermai, that was inspired by ancient Greek Herma statues and the deity Hermaphroditis. I was interested in creating a genealogy within art history in order to make sense of where we were at collectively at the time in terms of this sort of like conflict and confusion around describing and classifying, trans bodies. And, particularly at the time, there was a lot of like legislation going on, like the HB2, like bathroom bills. And yeah, I thought, the transgender bathroom bills that like the government was using to further police trans bodies, all, based on genitals. And, I thought back to this early memory of encountering this statue of Hermaphroditis. And, in Greek myth, Hermaphroditis was meant to synthesize the ideals of the masculine and the feminine. And you think about all the infinite ways by which the subtle nuances of the feminine and masculine could be represented. And, it's so often, it's mostly, reduced to a female form with a penis, like a voluptuous female form with breasts and a penis. And, and I created a fiberglass cast of my friend Alice in the same pose as a statue, but reoriented so the expectation to reveal one's identity is replaced with a position of active defiance. On the left is its installation at a gallery, in the gallery show, and then another installation of the piece a few years later at an outdoor exhibition at Elysian Park. So another statue of Hermaphroditis at the Louvre from ancient Greece. Hermaphroditis is often represented via lifting of the fabric of their garment for the salacious reveal of their genitalia. And, the reification of this gesture throughout Western art history, just wanting to find points within the history of visual culture that like led to this, and proliferates this like kind of conflation of hermaphroditism, intersex, and transgender, transsexual, like kind of all these representations in the present day. But I have this zoomed in image, just looking back at the statue, I was thinking about its age materiality, and though they were originally painted, with the colors having been faded over time, the carved fabric, the skin, and the genitalia are all of the same stone body, which served as like the inspiration for the fabric and body works in my Hermaphroditis' Reveal series. So here the fabric reveals negative space, and the relationship between the space, fabric, and bodies is of, indeterminate materiality, inconclusive discovery. And I should say so yeah, I'm using fabric in this case, but in this case, it's a fiberglass. Using multiple layers of fabric, of concealing and revealing, and I want these pieces to gesture toward the many subtle nuances of a body that contains hidden multitudes. Another piece, oops. Let's see. I am going to kind of move a little forward for the sake of time. Yeah, let's come here. So I use this is a piece that I made for the specific context of last year's Frieze Art Fair in LA. In all of my works that I utilize casting, of bodies, I use casts of a lot of friends of mine, most of whom are like femme, POC, queer, trans, and thinking about bridging contexts and spaces and communities. I think a lot about how sculptures can be active, how they can take and create space for non-normativity. And again, with this piece for last year's Frieze Art Fair, it was made using a silicone cast of my friend Sarah, and that looks like ectoplasm and sitting atop a vintage Ames Herman Miller chair. And it seemed fitting that this piece would be sitting in the space of an art fair, taking space, claiming the single chair as attendees were, tired walking around. I often look at materials as surrogates for transitioning different bodies into a space of greater recognition and empathy and dialogue. This is another piece called The Gift, in which I started using this technique of kind of what I consider to be using like the negative of the positive, and essentially creating casts of the molds themselves to create these kinds of skins that are all about, not about, that kind of like capture the texture and the kind of all the details of like surface, but in terms of like a sort of whole, solid, heavy, body is not there. And so the surfaces, the surfaces of these sculptures are burnished with pigments to highlight the texture, the dimension, the gestures of like the body parts that I'm casting, the kind of, it captures all of the little details of like the aged skin, the kind of like scars that might be there, like stretch marks, like the kind of like bodily struggles or like that are often unnoticed. And and then what I started to notice is like through creating these, that like these sculptures would reveal new forms, kind of like new shadows or traces of another body through the absence of a body. Thinking about the body as like a sort of like landmark, or also kind of inviting the public to complete the work in a way to question what lies beyond that skin. With these sculptures, I should mention the material is a mixture of plastic and resin, and the insides are burnished with like a wax mixed with like a kind of a pure pigment, so over like an acrylic wash on the inside, so it's like kind of similar to you know, so they're painted on the inside, but then the wax is kind of like a encaustic kind of style. But it really just like highlights what's already there. But anyways, yeah, with these works and this kind of installation with all these different hands placed about the space in different ways, you know, I was thinking about like a kind of a lot about like a sort of imagined choreography, you know, wanting to get to the viewer to kind of imagine, you know, their hand and kind of reaching for where the sculptures themselves are installed down below or up high, and, you know, what these gestures could mean. This was from a show titled Glimmered Through the Actual Square, curated by Joon Kwak. Yeah, and I wanted the viewers to contemplate the varied cultural expressions and identifications that are pre-inscribed within, you know, a simple gesture. That brings us to Sparty. In my initial application for this position over a year ago, I proposed a completely different project. And as the artist in residence in critical race studies, I came out here from LA to collaborate and engage the community of MSU around the ideas of, you know, diversity and race and critical race studies during an election year in a swing state at a tight, you know, at an intense time of like heightened and social and political rifts across the country. But yeah, and like when I came here, I thought like during this time when things are so segmented, and then also just when there were so few bodies present on campus, you know, I thought one meaningful way that I could engage the community but was by engaging with the symbol of the campus community of the university, one that everyone could relate to. Or like, regardless of your feelings about the symbol, it's ubiquitous. Like if you go to MSU, you know, it's like everywhere and everybody relates somehow to it. You know, and the symbol of the Spartan has been cultivated by the institution in ways that, you know, carry so much weight and influence and power, and you know, demonstrated by this campaign when, you know, in the early last year to wear masks, get the community to wear masks, and the symbol of the Spartan and the Spartan statue on MSU's campus, it showed me that like, you know, this could really be used as a starting point to stir a dialogue around important issues that affect the community, you know, and could also, you know, whether they be about health or, you know, issues of race and gender and violence and the identity of the campus. I became interested in researching what lies beyond the symbol, you know, or just like kind of, I always start with like kind of like, you know, just the history of the symbol and the kind of contemporary uses of the symbol, and, you know, what exactly are the identitarian like virtues that it represents? What are the contemporary implications of the Spartan, and how does it relate to the greater culture and identity of the university and the student body? And you know, also I mean, there was a lot going on this in the spring and summer, just in terms of like a kind of public discourse around monuments and this kind of public debate over toppling down monuments or preserving them, and you know, it's sort of reflecting the larger kind of binary opposition that like politically and socially that I was witnessing happening around the world. In the country for sure. And then also, you know, I mean, I again, back to like wanting to explore the implications of the Spartan statue as this like exemplary body of the campus and essentialing ideals of like a sort of like, raced and gendered, like physical fitness. And yeah, and I found this on a Reddit thread that I thought was funny, just with that's a Fernando Botero sculpture of Il Guerriero, the warrior, which is installed in Tuscany, Italy. But yeah, there's one person saying, Sparty has unrealistic body proportions that are just not in line with the progressiveness that is late 2019. And somebody else is like, oh, good idea. This new statue will put an end to body shaming. Continuing my research, I found that there are numerous links between Spartans as a cultural symbol and fetish object that's been adopted by and come to represent right-wing sectarian groups and highly politicized ideals, with ties to fascism and racism and xenophobia, certainly like pro-gun rights, and this is like all around the world, like, well, in Europe and in America, so not all around the world. Tory hardliners, unleashed another round of havoc in British politics, refusing to vote for, at the time, Theresa May's like Brexit plan and paving the way for, her replacement by Britain's Trump variant, Boris Johnson. And the group of hardcore, that group dubbed themselves Spartans for their single-minded willingness to hold the line, to sacrifice anything in obedience to their convictions. And British news outlets ran with the moniker, and like, yeah, and for pro-gun rights, pro-gun advocates, the slogan "Molon Labe" has become a rallying cry of resistance to perceived government overreach. And and in footage of the insurrection on Capitol Hill on January 6th that was incited by Trump in the crowd, he saw a man, there were several people with this kind of like imagery of like the saying of Molon Labe, and this sort of like Greek Spartan helmets with Trump painted on it. And yeah, and Molon Labe is like the phrase that Leonidas is said to have uttered when the Persian king ordered him to lay down his arms, which is classical Greek for "come and take them." Yeah, and this was a week after the riots, the newly elected Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene from Georgia. So, that's not how I think the MSU community largely looks at the Spartan. Still, it's just interesting to consider how the Spartan as a symbol is viewed outside of the institution. And just, I just started seeing a lot of like that. There was like an internal kind of discussion within the institution around how some classicists have come around to the idea that their discipline forms like part of the scaffolding of white supremacy, that the very concept of Western civilization emerged as a euphemism for white civilization in the writing, like, and like viewing this as such, like institutions that continue to use this symbol, like these symbols play a role in constructing whiteness. This, the symbol that's so entangled with white supremacy to be like inseparable from it. This, I mean, like even though they themselves didn't really consider themselves as white. The Spartans, I mean, like in ancient Greece. This is, and so this is just all, I say this to like highlight how politically overwrought and fraught the symbol of the Spartan is, and how it just seemed like generative material for me to encounter. So we all know that our role as like, and being a teacher and stuff like that, and an artist, a citizen of the world, and just, as much about it exposing untruths about as part of that, like, but to just like simply condemn like the like symbols of like classical culture, just the culture itself, would be as simplistic as to offer to like just like unconditional admiration. And I want not to just rethink the past narratives, but also to reflect on who we are today and where we're going. It's not about replacing. This is about like or about like a demolition of like the symbol for demolition's sake. I want to build something. It's not so much like the negation of the Spartan as a setting Spartan symbol into motion, catalyzing a sort of movement through and allowing the symbol to potentially like re-signify and commemorating the Spartan in an unconventional way through like unconventional formats and a different material that carries multiple meanings and allows for multiple interpretations and forms of interaction. Yeah, I was also really surprised to learn a lot of things about like kind of like the social life of the statue, like these pennies that are stuck all around the statue to different parts of Sparty by members of the sports, the team's players, for good luck, as this sort of like ritual during the season. And I saw, I would go back and see sometimes like that. I made multiple trips to the statue, and sometimes like, I would see one and then it wouldn't be there the next time. And then sure enough, like there would be more the like a few days later when I revisited, and yeah. And this is a shot of like, oh, so for my project, I created molds of the actual statue in order to create new sculptures. That was the intent, and kind of thinking about the same like kind of skins that I had created before. And yeah, and through this process, we had a notice kind of like saying, oh, I'm the artist in residence of critical race studies. This is art. But like over the 3 days that we were, myself and two students at MSU, Nikolay Gubit and Lauren Batdorf, who were helping me on site, there were just a lot of interactions with passersby, and like just people like yelling like, oh, what are you doing? And just like kind of being so quick to presume that like we were vandals, or yeah, that like we're somehow desecrating the statue. They would read the sign like say, but then like they would still overstep the boundaries and kind of really be disruptive, or like start taking pictures. And there was one and like literally somebody just like got on the scaffolding itself, and there were like some crazy acts of aggression. I mean, it didn't help that it just so happened that we were also doing it during the season between games, and also it also happened to be election week. You know, people were like, yeah, asked us at one point, like, oh, who are you voting for? You know, and like, what the fuck is critical race studies? And so this is a shot of Nicolay mixing the silicone on site, and you know, it required a lot of collaboration and care and attention to detail to capturing and preserving the surface of Sparty's skin. And you know, I've gently touched the statue everywhere on its body. And during this moment, with how like touch has been so politicized during the pandemic, it feels really meaningful and like performatively, like to be engaging with Sparty in this way. I'll go a little faster. Okay. You know, plaster band, you know, so that's a silicone mold, the plaster bandages, my taking apart that plaster mold, and we get to the sculptures. So again, like this is like the inside, or I guess, or just one side of the Spartan, this sculpture that I created, you know, with the same kind of burnishing technique that reveals all these details that go unnoticed in the statue, reveal, you know, Leonard Jungwirth, the original artist's hand, the varying pressures of his touch, the sheer multitude of his like hand, his touch, and the care and tenderness from which he modeled this body. You know, it revealed the human construction of this symbol, and thus like the potential to reconstruct it. You know, and rather than feeling like oppressed by these like symbols that don't represent us or something like that, like the body of Spartan can be the site for like imagining a sort of agency of creation. This is another angle of it. And so this process of like burnishing too, it's like, that's like concave, but convex, it does weird things perceptually. And, you know, and I think a lot about not only like how identifications are inscribed into gestures, but how gestures can be inscribed into materials. And, you know, and I think about like how the symbol reveals itself as not yet formed, and a sense of, you know, continual realization of being molded. And like the kind of like emptiness or the absence of a hollowness, like kind of, yeah, these will have stands like the older ones. So I'm showing you like, y'all are getting like a behind the scenes, like this is Spartan's, Sparty's booty, you know, rather than creating a mere replica of the statue, these, you know, imprints of the statue's surfaces, I think about them a lot like trace fossils, you know, that kind of highlight the hidden details that often go unnoticed, like I said. And the social life of the statue, again, such as that like tradition of pennies that are attached to different parts of Sparty's body for good luck, and like trace fossils that present like one version of the truth of the life and evolution of an organism or being that once lived. It like presents an alternative narrative or history. And, you know, I wanted to create this opportunity for viewers. This is a close-up detail of like the inside surfaces of some of them, to see that like I wanted to create this opportunity for viewers to project part of themselves, like for viewers' projections, to see that the figure that at once seemed so whole and impenetrable, that like Sparty too contains multitudes with so many details and layers of abstraction and images that slowly start to reveal themselves depending on your perspective. These don't yet have that burnishing in them. They're still in progress, but you know, I with these in particular and like the kind of scale of them, thinking about like the sort of like topography or geography of the body, like a sort of map of potential bodily potential, or that's how I imagine it anyway. Like a yeah, this sort of like quasi not yet body as like a sort of abstract map of transformation in a way that you know. Ooh. And then I so I started using, you know, experimenting through a whole different, you know, just thinking about what does casting mean, you know, how these are sort of like impressions, like fossils are like impressions of the actual objects. And then I started using the molds, just wanting to experiment with using them as for to make prints. And so I would take these like body makeup sponges and apply ink to them, the molds themselves, to create these large scale prints. Um, you know, really wanting to further that sense of like how Sparty revealing himself as this like processual like body that is like emerging, short, you know, that's short of a clear image, you know, that's short of something tangible, and through its opening, you know, these openings, that releasing that like potential to explore, you know, what constitutes like a body itself, a community, and you know, yeah, where the body starts to deviate from its form, its ephemerality, like reconnecting to other forms and other bodies. I can, oop, yeah, they become something else, like fragmentary, multiplus, kind of like assemblage of these different like marks and fragments of, you know, recognizable body parts, and just, and you know, the in between spaces, like the so-called like negative spaces for me on the paper is so important in terms of like being able to, those are the spaces in which you can imagine like the, you know, affects that are flowing in the spaces in between the seams of the fragments, and the, you know, opening up the possibility for a variety of interactions and transformations. I promise I'm almost done. Okay, that's like the mold for that. Oh, and you know, also just like wanting to make these prints of, like, that's a fragment, mold fragment of like Sparty's hand holding fabric into foot in the statue. And so that, like, you know, pushing that like kind of indeterminate materiality even further, flattening it out in a way through this print, you know, where this like kind of like hand, fabric, foot, like kind of the draping of skin, the draping of body, and you know, the kind of abstraction, further abstraction of that, like you know, and not wanting it to function singularly within either the space of like a kind of figuration or abstraction, or you know, or symbol or just gesture, like the and thinking about that space again, like of the in-between space, the interstitial spaces, like this, like uh a space, like the space of indeterminacy that can be thought of as like a space of potentiality, you know, of imagination and creating dialogue. And just to give you a sense of like the scale of that. Okay, last slide. With capturing Sparty's fragmentary impressions, you know, that's when I'm thinking about like kind of when divisive politics and normative identifications of like that are constricting identifications of race, class, gender, et cetera, like blur, and transformation and movement, you know, may occur in this yeah, and with this figure that's like Sparty being fractured, incomplete, you know, this talk, the artwork itself, and you know, these images, it's all a sort of invitation to the viewer to participate in imagining what the symbol could become, what the future could hold for like a kind of imagining this like symbol of like oneself, one's community, and you know, inviting the viewer to complete that. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Young Joon. That was amazing. We
Oh,
have a few minutes left, and would love to convey questions or comments from the audience to Young Joon for discussion and potentially dialogue. So please don't hesitate to drop questions or comments that you might have into the chat or into the Q&A on the webinar. Either one would be fine. I want to get started while we're waiting for folks to type in their questions. I'm struck by the role that revealing or revelation plays in the work that you talked about today. And you mentioned it a couple of points. The idea of creating connections, right, across bodies and across perspectives and that sort of thing. And I'm curious if what your perspective on the role that revealing or revelation plays in producing the connections and creating the connections between people and between perspectives. Is that, if that's, that was at least where my mind went when you talked about that particular aspect of your work, and I was curious if you had any reaction to that.
Yeah, I mean, like, I think that like well, like with different kinds of techniques, like the revealing and the abstraction and the concealing and the kind of looking at in different ways and, you know, taking alternative perspectives. It's all kind of like like I feel like they're all intertwined in a way.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
you know, work as a means of like also thinking, you know, inviting a kind of like more active viewing or active like participation, and kind of like I want the viewer to also, you know, reveal it for themselves. I want it to be that open-ended, you know, I want it to be kind of in process of revealing, you know, again, that like kind of this interstitial space of like, what is it revealing? And that being something, yeah, I mean, not wanting to tie it down and like kind of, yeah, so it's about that kind of process of like that state of, you know, becoming revealed, or yeah.
That's really helpful, actually, and also mentioning concealing. Think about kind of moving back and forth dynamically between revealing and concealing. And thank you. That was really interesting. We have a question from Megan Dean, and I will read it.
Hi, Megan. Oh.
Thank you so much, Young Joon.
I
That was
was
fascinating.
thinking about you, Megan. Like, really, I was glad that you're. I didn't have it. I'm a mess, and so I didn't think. But I'm really glad that you're here, and just, especially with like your research too, just about bodies. But anyways, sorry.
It's okay. I'll read the comment.
I can't hear you.
And then
yeah.
Okay. I was wondering about the coloring of the pigment you use to draw out the texture of the skin. Is there something specific about the color you use in terms of thinking about race and how it gets conflated with skin color? Or is there some other reason for the colors you choose?
You know, I tried several different colors. Like I thought like I used pink in some, and with the burnishing of like the lighter color on like wash on the inside, and then adding like the burnishing with like darker pigmented wax to really bring out the textures. So I started with like a pink with like a darker kind of reddish, I guess, and then it just started looking like bloody, like kind of like Spartan, like I skinned the Spartan, and I don't want, yeah, but like I don't want it to be that up, just that. But like and it's again like kind of it just seemed a little too gruesome or something like that. Like I was trying to find some midpoint of not alienating the viewer immediately in one way or another, like kind of and I just generally wanted there to be just like a sense of warmth and different shades of like of browns and like yeah, yellows and golds and oranges and kind of yeah.
Great, thank you. We have another question from Jenny Kendler.
Oh,
I
hi,
am fascinated by
Jenny.
the idea of the fossil and the trace you mentioned, this sort of alchemical process of transformation through organic processes as an allegory for cultural change. I wonder if you could further discuss the signification of some of the materials and processes you use in this light.
Yeah, I mean it's yeah, like alchemical for sure. Yeah, Jenny, yeah, I mean I'm just thinking it sounds so witchy, but like Jenny, I'm familiar. Jenny is also a really great artist, and she's totally, we're both witches. I think. But yeah, I mean I think that in a way it's like about like uh in a lot of ways I think about just like kind of taking things from around my environment, like kind of the ruins of capitalism, of these symbols of toxic masculinity, like these symbols that don't actually represent us, like the like kind of these relics of how our bodies are objectified at this moment, and then kind of like creating these objects that I feel like are yeah, like in a way will be like kind of like relics, or they're like future relics or something like that of this time. But then being able to kind of use these things, bring them together, not feeling like, I think it's easy to get bogged down or feel like kind of like a slave to these symbols or like our environment around us. But then being able to take these things, and again, like it's like a sort of play or an alchemy, and then like kind of creating this other thing, and an object to like catalyze like a kind of like imagination for some alternative vision, like in yourself and in others. But
Thank you very much, Young-Joon.
thank you.
We are now at the end of our session.
Okay.
I want to again thank Joon Kwak for the wonderful and very powerful presentation, and I want to invite.
Thank you, Michael.
Oh, you're welcome.
This is really great to, like I said, just like it's an appropriate kind of like space. Like, thank you for making that space for like my messiness and like a lab to like kind of figure this stuff out myself. It's still very much in progress. Where else could I do this? So thank you.
It's amazing work. I'm just really grateful that you shared some of it with us. Thank you. And to everyone here, if you're if you're free in a couple of weeks and you are able to join us again, please consider stopping back by. We hope to see you again. Thanks so much, everyone.